is truly an honor. My life in law enforcement didn't begin with a childhood dream of being a cop. As a matter of fact, I had very little contact with the police when I was a child. I was born and raised in the Humboldt Park neighborhood of Chicago. My parents were both factory workers and took great pride in a hard day's work. My dad left Puerto Rico and most of his family at the age of 18 to make a life in the States. He paid attention at work and learned to speak English so that he would not be overlooked for promotions and special assignments. He always said, learning happens while you're doing. My mother also worked full-time, both at the factory and at home. She was proud of her roots and held on to tradition. She was very comfortable in her role as a wife and a mother, and was driven by a desire to care for her family. As a little girl, there was a lot that I did not understand, notice, or thought twice about. For example, as a little girl, I never thought about my mother catching that limousine to go to work, but my father was getting into his car. As a little girl, I never gave a thought to having clothes that were always clean and ready for me to wear. As a little girl, I didn't notice that my mother made breakfast and lunch for my father before we left to take the bus to the beach, the zoo, Kittyland, or wherever else my mother had planned for that day. As a little girl, I never noticed that my father drove home from work, changed his clothes, turned on the TV, sat in his recliner, while my mother walked home, made dinner, and served it to him. As a little girl, I never noticed that when I went to bed, my mother was still awake. And that when I woke up, my mother was already awake and ready to go to work herself. As a little girl, I never knew that my mother couldn't help me with my homework or a school project because she only had a 4th grade education. And Spanglish, not the same as English. As a little girl, I didn't understand that my 2 older sisters were single mothers who escaped abusive relationships and were working and supporting their children on their own. As a little girl, I didn't understand that the big brother I adored was part of a street gang and that my father didn't want him around because of it. As a little girl, I didn't understand why, when my brother was murdered in the park at the age of 20, my mother did not shed a tear, but my father could not stop them from flowing. As a little girl, I didn't understand why my father was so angry about those black and blue flowers that were delivered to the funeral home, and why my brother's friends weren't allowed inside. As a little girl, I didn't understand why my parents decided to sell our home in Humboldt Park and move to Skokie. Yes, I went from Humboldt Park to Skokie in 1984. Call it a culture shock or diversity training. So for this 12-year-old girl going through puberty, call it a nightmare. Skokie in the spring of '84 was not what I would consider a diverse community. My younger brother and I had a difficult time making friends. For the first time, I noticed that we were living in a neighborhood where no other kids looked like us. At first, when my younger brother and I would go to the playground, there were kids that would knock us off our bikes, call us names. Sometimes they would even spit in our faces, with adults sitting just feet away. We always went back. Sometimes our big sister would come back with us, but those kids were always gone. Just seeing that our big sister was angry made us feel better. After all, we were kids and our big sister was about to go kick some butt. After a few weeks, my brother made a friend, and by midsummer, he had several friends. He no longer needed me to go to the park with him. I was happy for him. But then I noticed my mother hadn't been around much on the weekends. There was breakfast and lunch for us, but where was she all day? I got up early one Saturday morning and walked downstairs to find my mother making breakfast and lunch. I immediately understood what she was doing. I ran upstairs, got dressed, chased her down the street, and met her at the bus stop. The rest of the summer was fabulous. I watched soap operas all day and took the bus into the city with my mother on the weekends. There were even nights that my father took us to the YMCA to go swimming or to take karate lessons. I didn't even notice that I didn't have any friends. My father worked hard to buy us the things that he believed would help us fit in with the other kids. For my brother, that meant a new bike, a few baseball hats. But he didn't realize that for me, it wasn't going to be that easy. On our first day of school, my brother was so excited about the 5th grade. I, on the other hand, much. We walked to the corner to wait for the school bus, and there were kids at our bus stop. I remember thinking, where the hell were you guys all summer? Then I realized I was missing all summer. We got on the bus, and a bus driver knew our names. When we got to the school, there was a secretary waiting to take us to the office. But I couldn't move. This school was so small compared to our old school. There was a field with grass, a huge playground that had basketball hoops with actual nets, not milk crates. It was awesome. I loved my first day of school. I noticed that I didn't look like anyone else, but more importantly, everyone looked different. My classmates were so nice to me, and they asked me questions all day, like, hey, were you in a gang? Did you ever see anyone get stabbed? And my favorites, what is a Puerto Rican? And do you speak real Spanish? By the spring of 7th grade, I had learned to play soccer and basketball in gym class, how to use a sewing machine in home economics, how to type in keyboarding and make a birdhouse in shop class. I learned to play foursquare at recess, and I learned that Iron Maiden's Power Slave was the hit. I had friends now, and I was attending bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs almost every weekend. My parents even let me have parties at my house. My big sister Evelyn would supply all the Baker Square pies so my classmates would come. By the time I graduated from grammar school, I had learned that listening and adapting to change were very important traits, and that I could always say what was on my mind, as long as I said it gently and with a smile. As I began high school in the fall of 1986, I continued to play sports, improve my listening skills, and share my culture. I soon took on leadership roles in all of my activities. My senior year, I was president of the Spanish club, all-conference and captain of my soccer team, president of peer counseling, and of our snowball chapter. But at home, my mother could no longer work and was forced to go on disability due to emphysema. My father had to have a hip replacement, which led to his retirement, and subsequently had his leg amputated due to the diabetes. My sister Isabel was dealing with two bull-headed teenagers who she had to keep a constant eye on. My sister Helen had new Irish twins and a teenage daughter who was about to become a mother herself. She also had a husband who had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and was terminal. My sister Evelyn was newly married and attending nursing school, all while starting her own family. And my little brother was now in high school. All that being said, as my classmates were talking about colleges and preparing for entrance exams, I had no one to help me with the daunting process of applications and fees. My father even told me, sending you to college would be a waste. Get a job, find out what you like and be good at it. You don't need college for that. Boys need college. Girls always get hired to do something. I graduated Niles West High School in the spring of 1990 and moved out of my parents' home. I let my soccer scholarship fall to the wayside, and I didn't have a real plan. I got a job at a little cafe downtown and made some good money on tips. I lived with my sisters and helped them with their children, so I didn't have to pay rent. Hey, I was 18 years old. I only had to worry about me. I could come and go as I pleased. I had money in my pocket. I could hang out with my boyfriend whenever I wanted. I had plenty of time to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. August 8, 1991, at 19 years of age, I gave birth to my first child, William. He was perfect. As a mother, I now realize that my own mother's strength and resiliency was built on the hope, love, and faith she carried for her children. As a mother, I now knew when we visited my parents, my father smiled and played with William. And as we talked, the resentment lifted and my anger diminished. As a mother, I now understood that my father was the weak one. He was weighed down with guilt and his frustration, with feeling that he hadn't provided enough for his children. As a mother, I now knew his anguish. As a mother, I understood that my life was no longer my own. In the fall of 1993, my boyfriend decided to apply for a position at the Cook County Sheriff's Office. So I went and stood in line with him. When we got inside, the gentleman handed me an application too. I looked at my boyfriend, shrugged my shoulders, and said, "What the heck? gave it a second thought. On March 10th, 1994, I was at my father's bedside as he took his last breath. He was only 60 years old. We laid him to rest on March 12th. I was sick and heartbroken. I couldn't stop throwing up. The headaches kept me up all night, and I didn't have an appetite. My mother looked at me and said, "Mira, chequeate a ver si no está embarazada otra vez. Una de ustedes tenía que ser a mí." Get that? Okay, I'll translate. "Hey, you better check to see if you're pregnant again. One of you had to turn out like me." I was so angry. How can she joke at a time like this? Pregnant? Come on. My father had just passed away. I was at his bedside by myself. I had just promised him that I would make better decisions and make him proud. That I would find a job and learn while doing, so I can get better assignments and be promoted. I'm not pregnant. I'm grieving. On November 20th, 1994, after several months of bed rest, I gave birth to my second son, Justin. Yep, Mommy was right. And once again, Mommy was front and center with her unconditional love, her motherly advice, and now some womanly advice. She explained to me that as women, we become stronger as our roles change and grow. That our ability to remain quiet and calm allows us to hear what others need from us and teaches us how to provide it. That our desire to care for our families makes it easy for us to adapt and compromise. And being true to ourselves builds self-esteem and confidence in our own children. On December 20th, 1994, I got a phone call that I never expected. It was the Cook County Sheriff's Office. I couldn't believe it. I reported to the Daily Center the next day. "Here's all your paperwork, Ms. Navarro. Fill out these forms, Ms. Navarro. This is a list of all the uniforms and equipment you need to purchase, Ms. Navarro." My head was spinning. I was so excited. I rushed home, and like a punch in the face, it hit me. How am I going to do this? I have no money to purchase any uniforms or equipment. I have no childcare. I'm still breastfeeding. Justin's only 4 weeks old. I can't do this. Before I can talk myself into turning down the job, my brother-in-law, Ernest, was knocking on my door. "What did they say? Did you get the job? When do you start?" I remember looking at him and trying not to cry. I didn't know how to tell him I wasn't going to take the job. I didn't have to say anything. Ernest looked at me and said, "I know how much all the uniforms and equipment cost. I'll give you the money to get all that. We can check the daycare for William, and I'm sure between all of us we'll find someone to watch Justin." He talked so fast, like only Ernest can, that before I knew it, I had all my equipment. I filled out an application at the daycare, and they had an opening for William. And my mother had agreed to watch Justin. Wow, it was really happening. I had a career, not just a job. I was given some on-the-job training at the Daily Center before starting the academy in January of 1995. It was brutal. Thank you. Because I almost can't see. And I needed that moment. The training instructors knew about my nursing issue, as they called it, and I was allowed to get up and excuse myself if I had an emergency. During PT, the instructor would shout, "Hold those knees together, Navarro. We don't need any more babies getting pushed out." But I made it through. I graduated on March 24th, 1995, and I was assigned to 11th and State. I arrived early the first day, and as I walked in the office, I saw 3 supervisors. I was relieved to see a female sergeant among them. After all, I still had the nursing issue. Before I could say a word, I saw them smile. I felt 2 very heavy hands pull down on my shoulders, and a man say, "Woo, they finally sent me a full-figured deputy." I couldn't move. My gut reaction was to punch him in the throat. Not because of sexual harassment or anything like that, but because he called me full-figured. The supervisors laughed it off, and the female sergeant escorted me out of the office and took me on a tour of the facility. "Don't worry about him. He's harmless," she said. When I got my first check, I couldn't believe it. How was I going to pay for childcare, the car note, groceries, rent? Well, I returned my recently purchased vehicle. I found a family member who lived closer to watch Justin, and I bought a bicycle. I was determined to become independent. In April of 1995, my boyfriend was hired by the sheriff's office and started the academy. I no longer had to feel guilty about being called first. He would leave to the academy in the morning, and I would load the boys onto the bike or into the bus. We got to where we needed to go. I had my independence. I could do this. I got this. I no longer felt as though I was in a have-to situation. I had choices, so I made choices. My boyfriend and I separated soon after. In April of 1998, I was placed on restricted duty and assigned to the Daily Center. Yep, you guessed it. On August 13, 1998, I had my third child, Isa. It was my husband's first child and my only daughter, so we were ecstatic. Her big brothers couldn't get enough of her either. She completed our family. In August of 2000, I was promoted to sergeant and assigned to the Court Services Civil Division. And on September 11, 2000, I gave birth to my fourth child, Margaret. After a short maternity leave, I returned to work, paid attention, learned my job, and although I was the least senior sergeant, I was named watch commander. In 2004, while still assigned to the Civil Division, my partner filed a grievance. I was now pregnant with my fifth child, but he believed that I should take my turn out in the field. Our department still had no clear written policy on pregnant deputies, and I was still required to wear a modified uniform. So he believed I should have the same duties. He became verbally abusive and hostile. I filed a complaint in June of 2004, and on July 11, my fifth child, Michael, came early. My husband had his son, and I was done. I returned to work after a brief leave and continued to learn by asking questions. I reached out to sergeants outside of my unit and worked on action plans and strategies to improve service of process and enforcement of orders. I got to know my deputies and learned to listen to what they needed, even if that meant telling them no to the things they wanted. I learned that no matter who my boss was, say it gently and with a smile. In July of 2008, there was one open position, and I was promoted to lieutenant. She only got it because they needed a female. She only got it because they needed a Hispanic. She only got it because of who she knows. A simple congratulations would have sufficed. Once again, I learned while doing. I paid attention, I listened, I stayed true to my ideals, and before I knew it, the hard work paid off. I was promoted to assistant chief in August of 2011. I continued to work hard and take care not to sacrifice my family for my career. After all, my mother taught me that my most important job was to raise good men and strong women. On November 28, 2011, my mother passed away. I had no time to grieve. I had a new position at work, my children were grieving, my siblings and their children needed help coping with the loss, and the Christmas holidays were around the corner. For all of them, I held it together. A few months later, in February of 2012, I was told that I had been selected to attend the FBI National Academy. I was overcome with excitement and grateful for the opportunity to participate in such a prestigious training. But how could I leave my husband with our 5 children? Especially when they were still grieving the loss. How could I choose my career over my family? When I told my husband, Michael, he didn't blink. You have to do this. Your children will be so proud. Your mother would be so proud. Do it. Next thing I knew, Michael called for backup. He told the whole family. I was getting phone calls encouraging me and telling me how proud they all were. Even my mother-in-law, Mary Pat, called me. I had learned so much from that big, stubborn, beautiful Irish woman. She convinced me. I told my department yes. In October of 2012, I said goodbye to Mary Pat. I promised her that I would look after her family and make sure they all stayed connected. She told me how proud she was of me and how glad she was that her family had me to help them through this. For all of them, I held it together. In January of 2013, I left my husband and my children for 10 weeks. I'm not sure he's forgiven me yet. To attend the FBI National Academy at Quantico. It's my turn. I was back in school. I was taking college courses, writing papers, researching, doing PowerPoint presentations, learning new leadership skills, communication skills, coping skills. I was doing it. I was proud of myself. Since graduating the FBI Academy, I have continued to work hard at improving my skills through listening, sharing, and doing. As a leader, I know that listening is important. As a leader, I understand that my words can encourage and motivate. As a leader, I think twice before responding. As a leader, I notice who needs to be at the table. And as a leader, I understand that appreciation for my entire team and the work they do is vital to my success. So here I am, March 31st, 2017, and I'm a superintendent with the Cook County Sheriff's Office and the keynote speaker at the Women of the Shield event. And I am a woman that knows family comes first. I am a woman that understands change is an opportunity to grow. I am a woman who notices that people listen when I say it with a smile. I am a woman who knows that I should think twice before I question how another woman made it to the table. And I am a woman who understands that the men, as well as the women in my life, have supported me, encouraged me, motivated me, and made room at the table for me. As I leave you today, I want to encourage you all, keep making room at the table. I fear that 21-year-old Carmen, who is on public aid with 2 young kids and only a high school diploma, will not be standing here speaking 24 years from now. That learning while doing isn't going to be enough to get her promoted. That her dream of becoming financially independent and having the ability to impact her life and the life of her family won't be a reality. That she will have to sacrifice her family for her career. That we will never hear her roar. I ask you all, as you leave here today, to look at who is in the room, working, listening, sharing, and waiting for someone to make room at their table. Thank you for listening to my story and for sharing in my journey.